Hello. All right, quick announcements. If you are doing any of the contests, most of them end at 4 p.m., so that would be Capture the Flag and Tamper Evident King of the Hill. Closing ceremonies will be at 5 o'clock in this room. The after party will be at the 23B shop around 6:30, depends how long staff takes to get there basically, but they're probably already open and will be accepting of you. If you've never been to 23B, if you're from out of town, I think it's worth the trip. At the very least, you'll see me get fairly drunk and play Hammer Jenga. That is Jenga with a ball-peen hammer in a 2x4 Jenga set. It's pretty awesome.
And electrified pickles.
And electrified pickles, is that correct?
Yes.
Talk to that guy if you're interested in that, I guess. Not sure if that's like a LA euphemism or what, but electrified pickles. I don't know. I just get drunk and play Jenga Dash. I really don't know.
And then chase me on the bike.
Yes, and mini bikes. Anyways, shenanigans is what I'm trying to say. So make it out if you can. It should be fun times. Otherwise, up next we have Zapp Hyr0n with From Zero to Bender in 12 Months. So please give them a warm welcome. Should I introduce him? I don't know who he is. Bitstream as well. Special guest.
It's a charity case.
Yeah. All right, so thank you for coming, everybody. I'm Zapp. We have Hyr0n and Bitstream. Let me just get started here. Oh, shoot. Anyone have Bitcoin? No? Okay. And all right. Waiting for Google. So this is From Zero to Bender in 12 Months. This is a story of my journey going from basically not knowing anything about hardware, being a software guy, and making the Bender badge for DEF CON 24. The second half of this presentation, we're going to actually talk about our badge for this year. You see a few of us wearing. There's actually 5 on the team. The other 2, Andrew and Jorge, couldn't make it. Can you hear me okay? No? I don't like holding mics. Now can you hear me?
Way over. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's going to be awkward. Now can you hear me? Okay, thank you. All right, so this is my story of how I, as a software guy, got into hardware. And just as a starting point, this has nothing to do with our employers. This is all done in our free time. All the views are our own. Let's make that clear. Any of our employers are in the audience here. So what is and not XOR? It's really nothing. Back at DEF CON 20, I created the Twitter handle walking through the halls when everyone's crazy about these parties, like the Ninja Party, there's an LOL Bitcoin party, there's 20 or 21, but everyone's crazy. It's like, how do I get a ticket? How do I get into this thing? So it's like, let's make a fake party and then invite people to it, and then have them meet us places that we weren't. So that's what and not XOR is. It was just random. But it turns out that's a label we use for 3 of us in the group, and now we're up to 5. We're really computer science, electrical engineers, and math. Again, we're trolling, sorry, not sorry. It's pronounced and not XOR. I probably should have come up with a better name. But then our Twitter avatars are along the bottom. That's Jorge, Andrew, myself, Zapp, Hyr0n, and Bitstream. So what do we do? If you've seen our Twitter profile, we make stuff and we drink beer. Back at DEF CON 22 or 22, we took the Ninja phone from DEF CON 20 and made that into a Bluetooth breathalyzer, and that was a lot of fun. If you blew into it and your alcohol level was low, it showed you a glass of milk. As you worked your way up, it was Heineken and then maybe some 151 if you were really drunk. DEF CON 23, we made a hackable Wi-Fi backpack. There's a Raspberry Pi running Web64. If you got in, it gave you a website that you could then crack into and get a code that was synced to my watch. And if you gave us that code, we gave you a beer. We only gave out 1 beer, and that was due to social engineering. So we had a lot of Corona left over. And then DEF CON 24, you know about Bender. And then this next year, we're calling it Bender S. Thompson. That's our badge coming up for this next DEF CON. We do like to brew, homebrew. We love craft beer. We don't drink any of that Budweiser water or Coors, anything like that. So who am I? I'm a self-taught coder. I learned BASIC when I was 8 and then C when I was 10. Been doing this all my life, mostly middleware. So this is like SOAP, Java, Oracle, PHP, SQL, XML, Just don't judge me. It's what my employer paid me to do. About 5 years ago, they promoted me into management. And now I go to meetings, I do office, and I travel. So doing the hardware stuff I do now balances out my work life. So until recently, hardware always felt like magic. It was like, I don't know why these bits are doing what they're doing. I don't know why these displays work. It just kind of works. So this has been a fun adventure. And we also have something on.
So who am I? I'm the guy sitting to the left of Zapp. It's kind of the same backstory. I began coding when I was about 11, 12-ish, figuring out basic C, C++, moving on to assembly later on, way too much school. Like most of us, once you get into that, you moved into some of the higher level languages, did a lot of work on like web app programming. I talked to myself and saying, yeah, I actually learned to use Adobe Cold Fusion, which is the worst and weirdest thing I've ever had to code in my life. War story. Homebrew, like beers, ciders, meats, working on different things. Want to bring some of that out to DEF CON if we can. Hardware though, we're here to talk about hardware hacking. The only experience I had growing up with hardware building stuff was like do-it-yourself kits. I followed schematics. I didn't know why things worked. Love my little quote right there. It's just saying my simple hardware with mods. They weren't just magic. They resulted in magic smoke. It didn't really work the way I wanted it to, so I'm kind of trailing behind Zapp as the software guy, catching up, learning hardware for projects like this, and really enjoying it.
All right, so one of the key things about our group is we are obsessed with electronic badges. Probably why we made our own. Turns out when you have an electronic badge, you can trade it, and so you can collect them all. It's an awful lot of energy to get badges, but we like them all. My first was the DEF CON 18 badge. I think there's a Wired article right as I was getting on the plane to go, and I just thought this was amazing. The Ninja Phone badge from DEF CON 20, QueerCon from last year was amazing. If you ever get your hands on it, it's an amazing badge. And then Jorge from our group, he actually made the one on the bottom left. That's the Crypto and Privacy Village badge at DEF CON 23. So it's easy, right? So I like these badges, why not just make my own? So I'll just come up with a great idea, I'll create a great design, I'll make a whole bunch and then profit. So how hard could this be? Problem is, this is everything I knew about hardware, and that's intentionally left blank. I didn't know how to solder. So how I got there in 194 steps. I'm serious. So step one was learn the basics. I went home after DEF CON 23, and no kidding, I bought a kit, an Arduino kit off Amazon, did every project front to back in a couple days, worked my way up to a 555 timer, which you see there. These are just some pictures of some of those projects. Then moved on to learn to solder, and that was very quick from through-hole into surface mount in September. By October, November, it was like, well, it'd be really great to make some ornaments for friends, so I started teaching myself PCB design in KiCad. Barely knew what a ground plane was, so it was just a lot of the basic things that you learn along the way. And this was all building up towards eventually doing this badge that I wanted to do. Okay, so now we kind of had the basics down. As a team, it was like, well, how do we brainstorm this? What ideas do we want to come up with? So obviously you need to have bling. When hackers drink alcohol, they like shiny lights. So we got to put a lot of bling on it. We got to put a screen. We want to make it hackable. So we thought, well, maybe we can make an Arduino because that's what we're comfortable with. We want the badges to talk to each other. We want to have games. We want to have Easter eggs. And Bender seemed like a logical choice since we love Futurama. Turns out that resonates with DEF CON attendees, so that's what we're sticking with. Some rejected ideas. We talked about doing password cracking with FPGAs. I don't know why, but why not? Doing another breathalyzer. We talked about doing a TV Be Gone, but that had already been done before. So that we kind of stuck with the bling and the hackability. So once we had those ideas down, this is a similar process you'll see we're following this here, was to go out and prototype these. So in the top right, that's a Nokia 3110 screen running our very early UI. And this was back in December. So if you've seen the Bender badge in August, we didn't change it much from some of those original designs. We threw everything on a breadboard, sent some stuff off to Osh Park, tried to collapse it down so it wasn't a bunch of wires everywhere. And that was to validate, hey, some of these ideas, are they feasible? Can we make them work? Those types of things. So the next step 6, was to fail. This was the radio module that we had on the board. And turns out when they're surface mount and they're castellated pins, I had a lot of problems with shorting. I barely knew how to solder, so we were shorting a lot of the pins. So I was like, well, I'll just raise them up off the board, it'll work. It did work, but it looked really ugly, so I'm going to embarrass myself in front of everyone. Okay, so the next step was to set up the bomb. So this was taking those ideas, taking the hardware we prototyped with, and then start to figure out what's the cost of doing all this and getting the cost per badge down. I was fronting a lot of the money on my own. The project last year was about $6,000. I had to convince my wife, hey, I'm going to make this back, I think, by selling these. I think people are going to want to buy them. Turns out they did. So, I had to keep it as low as possible. And so this bomb spreadsheet was something we visited almost every other day as we went through parts and changed things. Next step was to put it all together. So this is actually the very first Bender badge. Looks nothing like Bender. I even put alligator clips on it and wore around the house. My wife thought I was nuts, and I was, but that was the entire bomb on one perf board. Step 9 is a prototype. So Jorge put together this 4-layer board. We did 4-layer because we could, but it has all the same parts. We were trying out some different buttons. You see that there's a 5 button switch at the bottom. It wasn't that great, but there's a lot of fail there. USB didn't work. The crystal was, we had the wrong footprint. That button was terrible. The black button came off all the time. It didn't hold up anything. It didn't hold to my thumb very well. And we switched some of the pins on the display. Next step was, okay, so we have that. Let's start over. Let's rethink everything from scratch. So this is actually the schematic of the final Bender that we came up with. And then prototype that. So we got these in the mail in April and then started to assemble it. So here it is. This is the first Bender. We call this one, I think we called it Bender 1. Looks kind of like what the final one looked like, all those screens on the bottom, but it was also full of fail. Screen was on the bottom. I don't know why we decided to cover the grill on Bender. That was the worst decision ever, but that's where we put it. It also turns out that the reset button shorted the badge. And so it would reset the badge just fine, but it wouldn't put it in DFU mode like we needed, and the USB didn't work, so we're stuck with the FTDI. So once we kind of worked through that, figure out the failures, modify the design, start buying parts. And parts are coming in every day. I would have 1 or 2 boxes from China. I'm sure I'm on some watch list now because it was boxes and boxes and boxes of parts. So then taking the original Bender 1 and fixing it, we then did the Bender 2. This is the one that we actually took to LayerOne last year. These are the green Bender PCBs. Soldered that together. Here's actually Jorge wearing it at LayerOne last year. We got Hypnotoad working, so that's always a favorite. Step 16 was a lot of fail too. There's a phenomenon called ground bounce. If anyone knows what that is, it's an interesting phenomenon, but we learned if you have a switching regulator and you have ground loops, you end up creating 2 different ground loops that switches between those, creating a electromagnetic energy. And basically the radio is on the back side of the switching regulator. So we're basically throwing that energy right into our radio, just killing our RF. Not a good idea. So we cleaned that up, moved the voltage regulator down, and then started ordering final PCBs. The red PCBs, those are the master badges that we wore around DEF CON. We auctioned one off famously on Twitter. The black were kind of special ones we reserved for some friends, and then we had the normal white Benders. And then it was production. So this was in my garage, placing about 10,000 components by hand, putting them into the oven, taking them out, and then visually inspecting them, testing them. We had a soldering weekend. These 2 guys weren't there. The other 2 were there. It's 3 days straight of beer and just soldering and fixing things. So this was actually the first Bender that came off the line. Everything worked. We were able to flash it. This is flashing it with some of the graphics data. It took about 2 minutes to do. It was with a really lame protocol, but it worked. So if you see it in GitHub, I'm sorry, don't copy it, it's not good, but it worked. And so steps 19 through 193, repeat that 174 more times. See, I told you I'd get there. 194, so this was fail, and there's a lot of fail. We probably had about a 50% yield on these. So it was going back every night, after work, after kids are in bed, on the weekends, and manually fixing these, figuring out what the problem was. I have a boneyard in my garage of failed Benders that I removed parts from, or I just couldn't figure out the issue. The biggest issue by far were these solder bridges. You can see them called out there. On the bottom left, there's 2. The one on the left on that image, you could not see with the naked eye, and you could only see if you held the PCB just right. And it was just barely shorting the SPI pins, and that was very common failure we had, mostly because my solder face job was not very good. So some of the design issues before we get into this year's badge. Sharing a SPI bus is hard. We were sharing it between 3 different devices. That's a really bad idea. Radio, display, and the flash. So as we were reading data off the flash to send it to the display, we had to pause that to go check if there were packets on the radio and then do something with it. That created a lot of resource contention. It created a lot of pauses, a lot of freezes. We dropped packets, so we had our badge-to-badge game would have to basically send the same packet 5 times, hoping that the receiver would get it. It ended up with a lot of corrupted memory on the flash anytime we wrote. RF is hard, don't do it. Especially in your first project, just walk away, let somebody else do it for you. We did it, and it was not good. Turns out the badges could not hear anything. They could transmit, but they couldn't receive. So we had an idea to mass rickroll everybody from our master badges, and it just didn't happen. I was able to hit people from about 6 or 7 feet away, but it wasn't that good. So DEF CON 25 badge, I'm going to turn over to Hyr0n here in a second. The original intent when we presented this at CypherCon was, hey, support our Kickstarter. And that didn't work so well. That sold out in 12 hours. So I went to CypherCon with this 25 badge, basically saying, well, here it is, right? So we're going to talk about the badge coming up, and we will have about 200 for sale in person. So find us, right time, right place. We'll be on Twitter. At DEF CON, yeah. That's all you. All right.
To use the new computer. So,
What's that?
oh, that's right, no touch screen. So like Zapp mentioned, we had a similar process as we did before for last year. You know, no ideas are bad ideas. I think when we're sitting down trying to figure out what it is we want to do with the badge, it usually involves a lot of beer and just sitting there and saying like, what do you want to do? Do you want to, I think there was an accelerometer, throw it up in the air. If we got it going so fast, we would do unlocks, make it waterproof, take it in the pool. A lot of bad ideas that we filtered out, but I think that's the point, is just to sit down and figure out what it is you want to do before you really try to pick hardware with what you want to make. If you go the opposite direction, you can box yourself in. So we kind of just go through this iterative process of come up with ideas, pick hardware, prototype, repeat, and you keep boxing yourself in until you get something that everyone's happy with. And because of the Kickstarter, our budget increased 5-fold, which introduces a whole different slew of issues. You have to make sure you don't think, oh, I have money, so I can induce feature creep left and right. So the core of our new badge is really the Regato BMD 300 SOC. It's running a Nordic NRF52 ARM Cortex M4F, 512K of flash, 64K of RAM. It's running Bluetooth. It can do NFC and AMP, but we just focused on Bluetooth BLE for this badge for our comms to try to overcome some of the RF issues we had before and made it.
The RF is built into the module, so I don't have to worry about that this time.
Yeah. It makes it really nice to go with some of these SOCs where systems on chip, where everything has just been integrated for you. The antenna's placed in the perfect spot. It eliminates a lot of those issues that we saw before. We went from that monochrome screen to a 128 by 128 color LCD. It's a TFT. Double the pixels. I think Zapp will chime in a little bit later to talk about our drivers and how we're pulling 22 frames per second on the video. We went back with the same LEDs that we had before, the WS2812Bs. Nice colors coming off of them. And we still have the same like tilt and ambient light sensors and, double the PCB size because we wanted to make it special for DEF CON 25. I think one of the nicest things we learned though is a lot of the Internet of Things and IoT chipsets that are coming out, the focus is trying to make them very power efficient. So things can change as we're still finalizing it, but I think with the radio, with the screen and the LEDs running at like 20% brightness, I think we're pulling under 30 milliamps. So being able to pull under 30 milliamps, we can run a couple of AA's keep that badge running for a week, almost a week on that.
We haven't tested that completely yet. It's just an estimate.
Yeah, it's in the soft ballpark range, but it's at a point where we're like, hey, it's a nice amount of power draw. It's prototyping. Most of the times when people ask, what are we doing first? That's a picture I sent them. The nice little FU. But really, the first prototype we did after we sat down and scratched out, what we think we're going to do, I think this is about, September, October-ish time frame?
Yeah, that was September, and it was like basically everything we could find or we thought we might want to use or ever wanted to use, we put onto one PCB. And that was, you used every single I/O on that chip to make this work.
And of course, that's a good learning experience because we got to take all of our ideas, throw it onto one board, and realize we can't have everything that we want. Need to scale it back. A lot of it was good enough for us to start prototyping the software, but what was the main limitation on the spot? I think the screen was wanting to pull way more than we had available.
So the screen is the same one you have on your LayerOne badge. It's a ILA 9341 or 9143, something like that. So it's 320 by 240. And if you do the math at 16-bit, that's significantly more data per frame than what we're pushing. We're about 33 kilobytes per frame. I think that LayerOne is 120, maybe 250. It's very high. So when you throw that on an 8 megahertz SPI bus, right, theoretical limit is not very high, so you're going to get very low frames per second. With that unit, I got, I think, about 3 frames per second is what I was able to test with.
So not that great for Bling if we're going to be running 3 frames per second. And we decided to give it a little project name, so throughout the entirety, you would see things on Twitter or whatnot. We referred to it as Project Man-Bear-Pig. We decided to decorate our circuit boards with Man-Bear-Pig. So you'll see that pop up from time to time, and that's what it's really coming to. Through this year's brief, I guess we're going to toggle back and forth between hardware, software, or hardware, firmware, just to show the different features. And I think emulation's a good one to start with because even though it's software, you're emulating obsolete hardware. We thought about making more games again, but that's more of a procedural thing, a functional thing. We all knew how to do that. And it's a lot more fun to try to hack reverse engineer some old hardware that doesn't exist. And that way you can take a lot of public domain ROMs, include them on there, and, same amount of effort, but the people playing with the badge get more games in return. And that screenshot right there, we actually programmed that in Chip 8 assembly. So we got to work in some obsolete hardware's assembly, compiled that so we can include it and emulate on the badge. So if you're ever interested in emulation, this is the way to go. Look up Chip 8. You can take your language of choice, whether it's Python or Go or JavaScript or C++. It's a good starter project. There's only 35 opcodes. My first project on an emulator nearly a decade ago was with a Nintendo, which has 151 opcodes and 105 undocumented ones. Way crappier job to try first time around. This is a lot nicer. But it was nice going with this. It gave the game list kind of a throwback retro feel. We get a lot of Pong and Pac-Man type games and Sokoban or Joust, games we all grew up with. And I would say that the only other thing that makes it fun is dealing with an obsolete piece of hardware from RCA that had no standards. And I say that because if you look at that keypad over there on the right, it's a 16-character hex keypad. And the one on the left, it is from a calculator. Because when they were porting them back and forth, they were throwing them on HP calculators or giving them these giant hex pads. They never told people or the coders, for best practices, you should maybe use 2846 for up, down, left, right, and use F for action. In fact, any developer was allowed to use any key for whatever they wanted, which meant I got to drink a lot of beer and play a lot of video games over and over and figure out what keys map to what buttons. And instead of trying to hard code the emulators to work with the different games, because a lot of Chip 8 emulators rely on the users to go in the settings and tailor it for themselves, created like a scripting file, CSV, so I could generate dynamically all these config files for our games. So I just worried about, with our badge buttons, we only have 5 buttons. Not all of those games used all 16 of their keys, so out of the 200 games, we probably got about 60 to 70 good ones that we could map down. And then a lot of communication between me and Zapp back and forth, just saying, hey, you got the emulator working, I'm importing this, and lo and behold, there's undocumented opcodes for Chip 8 as well. developers did weird things, and you're getting this weird, I want to reverse engineer or emulate old hardware. Do I really want to support a feature that a software developer shouldn't have done in the first place? So it's an interesting type of balance that you want to do. So in tandem with that, I think we ran our first hardware prototype with Macrofab around November. I'd say the quality of everything we got came out amazing. We were very happy with everything that came in except our first fail, 2 to 3 months in. We grabbed the wrong sock footprint. We were using the BMD 300 and we just downloaded the 350 off of the manufacturer's website.
No, I created that footprint by hand, based off the wrong sheet in the data sheet.
Yeah, I mean, we download the data sheet we're looking at, and that's...
You wait for 3 weeks and realize you massively failed.
But Macrofab did an amazing job assembling our hardware to our specifications that we sent them. So I will give them that credit. It's not on them to know the data sheet of the weird parts that we're picking, but that's what we ended up with. So round 2, we decided, since we knew what we wanted to do and everything was working out as far as our components placing and whatnot, we decided to be a little risky and take our art design, which was, our Bender mixed with Raoul Duke, the Hunter S. Thompson character from Fear and Loathing, drew it up in KiCad, and then within 6 to 8 weeks, that's what we had show up. And actually, that's what we'll call, this is our Rev 2, because our Rev 1 was that red square that was a really cool paperweight that we all own now. You can see that there's a lot of test points around the hat, so we could work on that. And as you go down the different iterations, you'll see the different badges we're wearing. The final one, the hat's very clean. So one of the main features of usually our badges is Bling. It's blinking LEDs. And we thought we were going to go with these APA 102Cs that you normally see on Adafruit projects. A lot of makers and DIY projects use them, except for the fact that no one really tries to do mass manufacturing or production with them, especially in ROHS compliant fab facilities. Digging through message boards, and after our first round of prototypes we got back, we got about a 30% failure rate on the LEDs. They just can't get cooked that high, and using non-leaded solder, you have to cook them that high. So what do? We go back to what we know. Use the same LEDs from DC24, but we know how to deal with them. Easier to solder, easier to remove.
I hate these things.
Zapp loves these things. I'm being nice.
I get to solder 6,000 of them by hand.
Collectively, we get to solder 6,000. I think in the future we're going to work on finding better LEDs with the fab facilities. About what we're doing isn't really common for circuit board fabrication places. Not a lot of people go to them and say, hey, I want to create weird electronic jewelry or stuff that people are going to wear around. They usually look at you like you're crazy. Like, why isn't it in some enclosure that's made as a tool? And so we're coming to them with very strange requirements, saying, yeah, I need bright LEDs that you can reflow with these other components that are typically not used in this way. And so we're going to have them flown down with our member Andrew. And if you want to have fun with TSA, always pack your reels with those types of signage. It makes dealing with TSA really, really nice. And then, of course, dealing with our Bling. We want to get really good frame rates out of this, and we want to offload some of the processing. So what we do is we pre-process a lot of the GIFs. We use FFmpeg and convert it to a RAW. That way, over SPI, we can just stream them blocks at a time from the SD card over SPI straight to the screen. You guys want to add on that? I think it's going to lead into, yeah,
Yeah,
the display driver.
Yeah, just real quick. So the display driver, this is probably the proudest part I am on the software, right? So this is a custom-built driver. Nordic, who's the MCU that's actually built into our BMD 300, they just recently provided one, but we're already using our own. So ours is much better, much faster. Very customized, though. So if you start off, our goal was to maximize frames per second. So we spent a lot of time researching displays, looking at the theoretical maximum for frames per second with 16-bit color, the resolution, all that kind of stuff. I think I spent most of TourCon on my phone looking at perspective LCDs out there. if you recall back to my earlier slide, we had 3 devices running on the same SPI bus. This year we moved it onto 2 different SPI buses, so we can be reading from the SD while writing to the display. And the 3 graphics you see there, so the first one is kind of the normal driver where it's like grab a bit of data, do some processing, like if it's a GIF or it's a PNG or JPEG bitmap, you do some processing the MCU to decompress it, and then you blast that out to the display. We realize that's not really smart, so we need to remove that processing. We have a ton of storage. Every badge will have at least 2 gigabyte SD, which in today's standards isn't that great, but for an embedded project like this, it's a ton of storage. So we sacrifice that, and what we do is we have these raw files on the SD card where we basically decompress it with FFmpeg in the native format of the LCD, and we're just streaming it across. So in the second graphic, that's reading, I think, 8 kilobytes of data, and then it jumps over the LCD and sends that to the LCD. We figured out by doing that asynchronously, we can be reading one chunk while sending the last chunk, and then and just keep stepping those through. And that's how we're able to get 22 frames per second. We calculated what the data rate was, and that's about 5.9 megabits, which over SPI at 8 megahertz is theoretical maximum 8 megabits per second. So we have some overhead we can go tease out, but I don't think we're going to do that this year. 22 is more than enough for Bling on a hacker badge. And there's a whole hackaday.io post I put up there on this. It steps through all the steps we did. One of the shortcuts that I'm kind of proud of, but it works, is I just keep the select pin low the entire time. I don't bother to switch it because I don't want to use those microseconds.
Squeezing over drop out.
Yeah.
So I'd say, yeah, where are we at? I mean, our software feature is complete, our feature list. We're kind of in testing mode right now. One of the things we're happy to do at LayerOne, aside from come here and get the awesome Nintendo badges, Nintendo emulator badges and other things, we were testing it out and hearing some of the talks here. I think June, we're going to be focused on fixing all the bugs and tailoring it to work better. We're still waiting on a big delivery from Macrofab. I think in the next couple of weeks, the unpopulated without LED boards will show up, and then we're going to have our solder party and get this stuff out in July. So I'd say lessons learned. Self-humility is usually the core of everything when you're doing projects like this.
Run DRC, design rules check. Do it as the last step before you generate your Gerbers. On our Man-Bear Pig 3, which is the red revision, which we don't have out here right now, we had a VIA that was in a ground plane because we didn't run DRC. And so that's kind of become the theme over the last few months, where it's like, make that your last step, because when you run it, it regenerates all the ground planes, and that wouldn't have been grounded. So that pretty much is what screwed up our revision 3, which would have been our final. So we had to do these revision 4 blue boards. And those I'm actually doing by hand at home because we didn't have the time to send it off to a fab.
I'd say, in line with all the other fails we talk about, because we brought up some of the features, but yeah, double check your footprints, know your fab's process for things, how their manufacturing equipment works. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're trying to make a conference badge, a hackable conference badge, or if you're trying to create your own tools to assist you with security research, if you're working on the next type of prototype, your own Wi-Fi pineapple, it's good to take this kind of process and figure out what it is you want to do before you down select the kind of hardware you pick, and just iteratively test, build, repeat, fix, be open to criticism, and fix it whenever and wherever. If you're going to reverse engineer some old hardware through software, emulators are fun, so are undocumented opcodes. It could make you really pull your hair out, but I'd say if you've never done an emulator, go pick Chip 8, try it out. It's fun, and it can open up a whole world of possibilities where you start realizing maybe you want to get into emulating different pieces of hardware to assist you with the type of research that you're doing. The Arduino IDE.
Arduino IDE sucks.
Yeah.
Last year it was all Arduinos, about 6,000 lines of code, and it was a whole bunch of files. If you look at GitHub, look at the file names because they're all very short from last year. And that's because they arrange the files along the top in tabs. And so if it overflows that row, it pulls it into a drop down. So I was sick of using 3 clicks just to switch between files as I was coding. So I just shortened them so they would all fit on my screen. Not a good experience. This year, by switching to Nordic, it forced me to, well, forced the whole team really, was to get off of Arduino and learn to do something in pure C. So we're doing Make, GCC, Eclipse, GDB, so it's a much better environment. I have a lot more control over the hardware, everything that's going on. So Arduino's a good gateway drug, but and it'll get you hooked on hardware, but it's that next step that is very important, and it opens up a whole world of possibilities. Oh, much more satisfying, yes.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. Yeah, I think going through all this, like Zapp mentioned, setting up common environments, moving on, plan, prototype. Other weird things we learned, even if you're ever interested in using Kickstarter and Backfit, if you end up using them, we skipped out on Backfit, they take a lot of money, even more so than the IRS, which is strange to look at considering their fees are larger than tax rates.
What were the
Little odd.
fees? It was like 9, 12%?
Yeah, 10%.
10%.
They take 10% right off the top. If you use Backfit, I think it's another 2%, 1%. I know they're providing a platform, but for getting your project off the ground, it's a little odd. But yeah, we're going to have these in Vegas in a couple of months. We're going to be tweeting out where we are when we're selling them. And I think the important thing to take away if you're interested in these types of badges is that, you know, the goal of it isn't just to make something that you hang around your neck that has lights and blinks. A lot of us go through a lot of troubles to make these games, make puzzles. We want to make them hackable, whether it's through hardware, through software, through using different means that you would use on production line equipment to reverse engineer or break into it. We kind of like this to be a game. So depending on what your interests are, there should be something that you find fun trying to break into it. And we're designing it so that it can be hacked on, it can be updated, and there'll be little secrets and Easter eggs that you can discover along the way.
We'll talk about BYOD.
What's that?
Bring your own Bling.
Did it not come up there?
We didn't put in there.
Oh, weird, it got cut. Well, I guess one of those things is bring your own Bling. We normally had the animations and the Bling in there on ourselves, and we got a lot of requests for how do I add my own. So because the back of it has an SD card, we did make it so that the command will be out there so people can pre-process and bring their own animations and just drop it in on the SD card.
Including the LEDs. There are ways to do that, and the instructions are on the SD card.
So yeah, when we pass it out, we'll have pre-done scripts and people can make their own RGB animations, get their own animated GIFs in there. That way they can customize it however they want. If they don't like the 100 or so animations we're including on the badge already, they can just make it however they want it to be. I'd say that's about it.
That's about it.
Yeah.
So it is feature locked. So if there's a feature request, we'll consider it, but we do have a spreadsheet for next year. So we'll try. Any more features? So there was something, if you listen to the MacroFab podcast, we did do that this week, and they released it on Friday. So one of the features that we haven't talked about until now, there's a Tickle Interpreter on the badge. So keeping with the old school theme, and because it only required about 6 kilobyte of flash, we call it Tickle-ish, because it only has about 7 of the control flow commands that come with Tickle, and then we added about 30 of our own. So it's everything from changing an LED color to drawing on the screen. There's some basic I/O input output on the hat. There's a small header you can do things with. I don't know what people are going to do with it, but we'll see if they find something they like. Basically, you just drop these TCL scripts onto the SD card. They show up in a menu and you run them. So
I figured, yeah, there's a lot of overhead for some folks where if we say, hey, here's our badge, but you have to destroy the firmware if you really want to hack it to make it do something else. So that way, yeah, they can just higher level script the different C controls and keep the badge working normally while they can add their own things on.
Yeah, so, yeah, this actually originated, so back in January, I put a JavaScript interpreter on it. It's like, hey guys, look, I got JavaScript working, and it doesn't care about types, and I can do all this awesome stuff. It uses half of our flash. So we quickly nixed that idea and then switched to something that uses a lot less, because using half our flash for a feature that I hope a lot of people use, but it would take away from everything else we want to do. So, and JavaScript's lame anyways, so we stuck with Tickle. And then, so following this, we have some space over in the hardware hacking village. We do plan to give you some hands-on time, just don't walk away with one. And we're going to show how it can integrate with an IoT vodka bottle that you can buy from stores. We're not going to show it in here. We'll make room for the next speaker. But if you follow us over HHV, we'll answer any questions you have, or if you want to get hands-on with it. So,
Our badge hacks booze.
yeah, it hacks booze because it's Bender.
Any questions?
Yes. Why?
How or why?
Why not? So I'm.
Yeah. We didn't go into so on Bitstream. So I had a hardware background, but I'm not doing hardware on this project at all. I have a different feature that I'm working on, but it's
It's a secret.
It's a secret, so I don't get to talk about it. It's cool. But you know, as hackers, we all want to learn stuff, but it's very hard to learn things without having a project. Like, you know, you hear people say, "Oh, I really want to get into hardware hacking," or "I really want to learn how to solder." Well, you can't just pick up. I mean, you could just rip out a board out of your television at home and start desoldering components and learn how to solder. But that's really learning rework, not really learning soldering. But if you want to learn something like how to make a board, you got to have a project. And what better project than something that we can give back to the community at the end?
Yeah, so just to add a little bit to that, it's one thing to also design something on a perf board or breadboard to send your PCB off to China and then wait 2 weeks for it to come, or 4 weeks for it to come back. It's another thing to do that design and then make 400 copies of that and then make them all work. I learned that the hard way last year, and then I decided to come back for more, just doubled down. But designed for manufacturability, I know a lot of people say that, but it's a really hard problem. It's the way that you select your components, the way you place your components. It's also considering, how do I repair this if it breaks? There's going to be drunk hackers that walk around with this, and they're going to do weird things with it. So I let my toddlers play with these, and they run around the house, and they do all sorts of weird things. And I figured that's about the same thing. So, and they're just like mashing the buttons and doing, and it's like, well, how did you get it to do that? And I'm like, I don't know, Daddy. So
My 2-year-old requested Elmo Bling, so.
yeah, so there might be Elmo Bling Sesame Street, but designing for manufacturability and repairability is really, really difficult, because a lot of times you'll place things based off of looks or just convenience, but it's a different thing. It's like, I have to remove this by hot air. Well, there's a plastic Molex connector nearby. I need to move that away so that the hot air doesn't damage the adjacent component. That's something that's not always considered. And that's actually one thing, as we've stepped through the revisions, the repairability and manufacturability of the badges has improved. Any other questions? I think there was another one. Yes.
Earlier you talked about ground loop. How did you diagnose that?
So I had some help from the Whiskey Pirates. So True, if you know him from the Whiskey Pirates, he's a genius on hardware. And I'd been sending him my designs for quite a while. And he said, hey, you have some ground loops here. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And I looked at them, I actually traced them out. And I started reading about ground loops and switching regulators. And that's kind of when I was like, well, that makes sense given, what I'm seeing on the radio and then what I see here on the board. I didn't own an oscilloscope until after I was done with the first bender, right? I didn't own a logical analyzer until this last October. So I didn't really have the tools to even recognize there was a problem. So a lot of it was guess, but it was hard. And having the right tools is very important. Although last year having the small budget that we had and trying to, squeezing out 2 cents on a component was a big deal. We couldn't really afford that. But this year we've kind of worked that into some of the prototyping costs, and it's been much better. So. Yep. Oh, so that Arduino. So the question was, what's the name of the Arduino project kit that I used? It was one of the standard Chinese. It was VOS. It was sort of the V, I think. I don't know. I'm sorry. But there are a variety of these that will be, 15 projects, 30 projects. They come with buttons, displays, accelerometers. There's some that come with 9 button pads. But I picked one that was like $60, and it seemed to have a lot of things I was interested in, like temperatures, thermistors, and things like that. So they're pretty easy to come by, and they usually come with a breadboard, an Arduino Uno R3, and then a bunch of other components. The English sometimes can be a little off, so you have to figure out what they intended when they wrote the paragraph. But
And for those who, you may know of Arduino, but you may have never actually coded on one, when we joke about its IDE, it's like Notepad.
with
It's
some
like
coloring.
a slightly better version of Notepad.
It does what it's supposed to do. I mean, it's supposed to get people interested in hardware.
Yeah.
It's definitely accomplished that to its goal, but if you want to move past that, you're going to quickly find the limitations of that environment.
If you've grown up using Borland, C++, or Eclipse, or JBuilder, it's really going to hurt your feelings to use the Arduino IDE.
NetBeans, anyone? No.
No.
Talk about NetBeans. Yeah.
In your garage, did they see that?
It was a toaster oven. With a warning sticker on it.
Hamilton Beach makes great reflows.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, so I got a controller called a refloaster, and you put it in line with the power. And it's important not to get the nice digital ones, get the cheap dial ones. Because the dial, they let you put into a mode, I call it YOLO mode, but it's like you turn it all the way up, and then you turn the timer to a mode where it's no timer. So it'll just run at 800 degrees forever. But the refloaster, you put a sensor inside, and it will turn the oven off and on to regulate the heat. And that works pretty well, other than when I use some of the lead-free solder thinking I was going to do something nice for the environment. That doesn't work very well. But yeah, it was good. I could do 3 boards at a time. So I'd be placing, then I'd throw them in, and then go place 3 more, and then put those in. So I kind of had it down. Watched almost 4 seasons of Futurama, I think, doing it. Rough estimate of time commitment.
For me, just the feature I'm working on is like every other day from 8 to basically 8:30 at night till 1 in the morning. Since
It's
last year.
thousands of hours. The BOM does not include labor. It does include, this year does include beer. The quantity is lots. And there is a number assigned to it, but it's got to be a passion. So for me, if I'm not learning something new, I get kind of bored. And so that's why this year progressed as much as it did from last year, because I need to do something different. I need to keep moving. And we've already got some ideas for next year that'll keep that going.
But I'm excited, like you get excited doing, it's like any other project. It's just a longer project, but you still get excited going to work on it each time. That's what keeps you going.
If you, like I said, if you can take frustration as a challenge that you want to overcome and you enjoy those types of things, make electronic badges. It's a very frustrating, masochistic hobby.
You're designing hardware that's meant to be broken, and so it's a weird fun area to play in.
But yeah, I'd say for stuff like this, it doesn't feel like a commitment. I mean, I think we devote as much time as we can around the fact that we also have, 50-hour-a-week day jobs, a family, and I think a lot of times we're on chat and it's about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night and we're starting up, and we do what we can until midnight so we can get 5-6 hours of sleep before we do the do-while loop. Definitely only do something like this if you have a passion for it or you have a drive on this to keep you going. But I'd say even for us, 4 or 5 nights a week at least?
Yeah.
And get a group of people. Don't.
Yeah.
You could tackle it yourself, but it's going to be much more difficult.
I think how much code? 11, 12,000?
12,000 lines of code now. That's double the size. Yeah.
Yeah. That's not duplicate or other people's libraries. Uniquely written for this, 12,000.
Yeah,
It happens.
Any other questions, or we'll go over HHV and show off some cool features? Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
That's a root beer and a energy drink.